Hello, and welcome to today's deep dive. I want to begin our conversation today by asking you to visualize a very specific image. I am almost certain it's an image you've seen before, perhaps in a high school psychology textbook or maybe a corporate training seminar.
I have a feeling I know exactly which one you're talking about.
I want you to picture a triangle. It's, divided into these colorful horizontal slices looking a bit like a layer cake. At the very bottom, you've got the basic biological necessities: food, water, sleep.
hmm
Above that, you have safety, then a layer for love and belonging. Above that is esteem. And then finally, sitting right at the very peak is the ultimate goal: self-actualization.
You're describing Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's arguably the most famous symbol in the history of psychology.
Exactly. Abraham Maslow proposed this structure back in 1943, and it tells a very specific, very compelling story about who we are. It suggests that we're creatures who have to satisfy our baser sort of animal instincts first.
Right. Only once those are met can we move up the ladder to become our best selves.
It's a beautiful model. But today, we have a difficult job to do. We have to ask a hard question: is it actually true?
And that is a significant question. Does this model, built during the Second World War, actually explain how human motivation works in the modern world? Or, for that matter, how we functioned in the ancient world?
Because if the map we're using is wrong, we might be navigating our lives using, well, a broken compass. To find out, we're going to look at two very distinct pieces of academic literature.
We're going to try to bridge the gap between theoretical evolutionary biology and modern public health.
First up, we have a theoretical paper. It's called Renovating the Pyramid of Needs by Kenrick and colleagues, published in Perspectives on Psychological Science. These authors propose taking a sledgehammer to the top of Maslow's pyramid and rebuilding it based on modern evolutionary biology.
And to keep us grounded, to see if these biological theories hold up when real life happens, we're pairing that with an empirical study by Wren and colleagues. This was published in Frontiers in Public Health, and it analyzes the mental health of older adults in China.
So our mission today is to figure out what actually drives us. We're moving away from a rigid checklist of needs and trying to see the complex reality of life history, parenting, and intergenerational support.
And just a quick note on our tone. Because we are dealing with some complex psychological and biological concepts, we're going to take this slowly. Let's treat this discussion like a university seminar. We want to make sure we define our terms clearly so the logic of these arguments is perfectly understood.
I agree. So let's start with the demolition. The paper by Kenrick and his team, it takes aim at the very top of the old pyramid: self-actualization.
Which is a controversial place to start. In Maslow's view, self-actualization was the pinnacle of human existence. It was creative expression, seeking knowledge, spiritual growth.
He saw it as separate from our biological drives.
Exactly. He believed that once you fed yourself and found safety, you were free to pursue these higher goals that had, nothing to do with basic survival.
Right. The idea that the starving artist is a myth. Maslow would say you can't write a symphony if you're worried about where your next meal is coming from.
But Kenrick and his co-authors argue that this is a biological impossibility. They argue that self-actualization is not a functionally distinct need at all.
That's a massive claim. If I'm learning to play the guitar or writing poetry or painting a masterpiece, surely I'm doing that for myself. I'm doing it to express my soul, not to survive.
Well, let's look at it through the lens of evolutionary psychology. Why do humans have the capacity for creativity or music or complex storytelling? The authors argue that these traits didn't just evolve to make us feel good. Evolution is thrifty. It doesn't waste energy. These traits evolved because they conferred a reproductive advantage.
So when we see a great artist, I think the paper uses Picasso as an example. We see a person expressing their inner truth. But an evolutionary biologist looks at Picasso and sees something else entirely.
They see a display of fitness. Throughout human history, individuals who could display status, skill, and creativity were more attractive to potential mates. The paper argues that these self-actualizing behaviors are actually biologically linked to status and mating.
So Picasso wasn't just actualizing in biological terms. He was, engaging in mate acquisition or status seeking?
Precisely. And I know that sounds incredibly unromantic. It sounds a bit cynical even. But the argument is that you can't separate the mind from the biological machine it inhabits. If a behavior costs energy, and creativity costs a huge amount of cognitive energy, it must provide a payoff.
And in the strict currency of evolution,
The only payoff that matters is passing on your genes.
okay, so if we accept their premise that we need to chop the top off the pyramid because self-actualization is just, biological business in disguise. What takes its place? What is the new peak of human existence?
This is where the shift becomes really profound. In Kendrick's renovated pyramid, the new highest level is not about the self at all. The new peak is parenting.
Parenting. Wow. We go from finding myself to taking care of others.
It's a shift from the individual to the lineage. From an evolutionary standpoint, the ultimate goal of any organism isn't just to survive, it's what's called inclusive fitness.
Okay, let's unpack that term, inclusive fitness. I think when we hear survival of the fittest, we usually think means being the strongest or the fastest.
Right. But in biology, fitness is strictly a scorecard of how much of your genetic material makes it into the future. You can be the strongest, smartest human on Earth, but if you don't reproduce or if your offspring don't survive to reproduce themselves, your evolutionary fitness is zero.
So the new pyramid outlines a specific sequence at the top. It's almost like a flow chart for life history.
Exactly. The sequence goes: first, mate acquisition, finding a partner; then mate retention, keeping that partner, which requires a totally different skill set; and finally, sitting at the top, is parenting.
This sounds a lot like what biologists call life history theory, doesn't it? The idea that our needs aren't static, they change based on our developmental stage.
Yes. And think about it, it's intuitive. An infant doesn't care about status or mating, they care about physiological safety. A teenager, however, becomes, well, obsessed with status and mate acquisition. And then a parent focuses on the survival of the child. The hierarchy of needs changes as we age.
Now, I want to visualize the structure of this new model because the old Maslow pyramid was a stack of boxes. You finish level 1, you step up to level 2, and you basically leave level 1 behind, like a video game.
Right. Maslow sometimes implied that once you were self-actualized, you were somehow above those lower needs. But biologically, that's just nonsense.
So how does the new model fix this visual?
The authors propose changing the visual from stacked boxes to overlapping triangles. I want you to imagine a series of triangles that all start at different points but then extend upward together.
Okay, so the safety triangle starts at the bottom, but it doesn't just stop when love starts, it keeps going up.
Exactly. The lower needs never disappear. The paper uses a fantastic analogy from biology to explain why humans are built this way. The difference between simulparity and iteroparity.
Those are definitely academic terms. Let's break them down.
Of course. So, simulparity describes a reproductive strategy like that of a salmon. A salmon spends all its life energy swimming upstream to spawn. It reproduces once, expends every ounce of energy it has, and then it dies immediately.
Okay.
It trades somatic effort, that's taking care of the body, for reproductive effort.
That would be the stacked box model. You do one thing, finish it, and you're done.
Right. But humans are iteroperous. We reproduce over a span of decades. We have to keep our bodies alive and healthy while we reproduce, while we parent, and even after. We never outgrow the need for safety or food. So in the new model, when you reach the parenting level at the top, you're still managing mate retention, you're still managing status, and you're certainly still managing physiological needs.
They're all running in the background at once. That feels much more realistic to my actual life. It's not like once I had kids, I stopped needing to eat lunch or stopped caring if my colleagues respected me.
Exactly. It's a juggling act, not a ladder.
So this brings us to a crucial question. If all these needs, safety, status, mating, parenting, are overlapping and coexisting, how does our brain decide which one to listen to right now? Why am I not constantly trying to find a mate and eat a sandwich and protect my kids all at the same time?
Because that would be chaos. And this is where the authors introduce the concept of proximate levels or immediate triggers. The renovated pyramid is highly sensitive to the immediate environment.
So the context acts as the switch that turns these systems on and off.
It matters immensely. The paper gives the example of visual cues. If you're walking down a street and you see a potential predator, maybe a scary-looking dog or a threatening stranger, your self-protection system immediately takes over. It hijacks the brain.
Right.
At that moment, you do not care about self-actualization or mate acquisition. You care about safety.
But if you're safe at a party and you see someone attractive, the mate acquisition system activates.
Yes. And here's the fascinating part. These systems can pull us in totally opposite directions depending on the trigger. The authors discuss trade-offs. We are constantly analyzing the cost-benefit ratio of our behaviors based on which system is active.
Can you give us an example of a trade-off?
Sure. Let's look at conformity following the crowd. If your current goal is self-protection, maybe because you're in a dangerous situation, you are biologically programmed to conform. There's safety in numbers. You want to blend in.
That makes sense. Don't be the nail that sticks out.
But if your current goal is mate acquisition, particularly for men, the biology suggests you might want to be a nonconformist. You want to stand out to attract attention. So the same person can be a conformist in a dark alley and a rebellious nonconformist at a cocktail party.
So the personality changes based on the proximate cue.
It does.
So we're not just one static self, we're a collection of these evolutionary subselves that take turns driving the car.
That is a great way to put it.
I want to pivot now. We've been talking a lot about mating and parenting, which are these very active, high-energy phases of life. We've established that parenting is the new peak of the Kenrick pyramid. But what happens after that? What happens when the children are grown?
This is where we bring in our second source, the study by Wren and colleagues. It's a perfect companion piece because it looks at the other end of the life history spectrum. It analyzes the mental health of older adults in China.
And this study is deeply rooted in the cultural context of filial piety. For those who might not know, how does this fit into our evolutionary framework?
Well, filial piety is a Confucian concept, but it has universal biological implications. It's the obligation of adult children to care for and support their parents. In evolutionary terms, this is the reciprocal side of that parenting peak we just discussed.
You invest in your children, and later, the theory goes, they invest in you.
Right. The researchers used data from the China Health and Retirement Longitudinal Study. It's a massive data set. And they looked at 3 specific types of support that adult children provide: financial support, daily care, and emotional comfort. And they wanted to see how these affected the mental health of the elderly parents.
And the findings were pretty nuanced, weren't they? It wasn't just support is good.
Not at all. Let's start with financial support. The study found that receiving money from children significantly improved the parents' mental health. It increased positive emotions, and it reduced depression.
That seems pretty intuitive. Money solves problems. If you can pay for medicine and food, you're happier.
True, but the researchers identified a specific mechanism why. It wasn't just about paying bills. Financial support enabled social participation.
Social participation.
Yes. In the context of this study, older adults with financial support were more likely to engage in society. They could afford to go out, visit friends, or play mahjong.
Ah, so the money actually bought them access to the belongingness level of the pyramid.
Exactly. And emotional support, just talking, visiting, listening, had a similar positive effect. It acted as a buffer against loneliness and depression.
But, and here's where the study gets really interesting, and a bit counterintuitive. There was a third category: daily care. This means helping with basic physical tasks like bathing, dressing, or cooking. You would assume that being cared for by your family would make you feel loved and secure.
You would absolutely assume that. But the findings revealed what we might call the caregiving paradox. The study found that while receiving daily care did increase positive emotions, parents felt loved, it also significantly increased negative emotions.
That is fascinating. So they felt loved, but they also felt worse. Why?
The authors suggest the cause is guilt and shame.
Guilt.
Think about it through the lens of that evolutionary pyramid we just discussed. For decades, these people were at the top of the pyramid. They were the providers, the parents, they had status. When an older adult requires daily physical help, they lose that independence.
They begin to feel like a burden.
Exactly. A burden to the very people they're supposed to be supporting. It creates an unbalanced exchange.
It triggers a loss of status.
Yes. And remember, Kenrick told us that status is a fundamental biological drive. If you feel like you are purely a drain on resources, even if those resources come from your own loving children, it triggers a negative psychological response. We don't just want to survive. We want to feel valuable.
That is a powerful insight. It suggests that our evolutionary programming doesn't retire when we do. We still need to feel like we're contributing to the tribe.
Precisely. And the Wren study highlighted that this plays out differently for different people. There was significant heterogeneity, particularly when it came to gender.
What did they find regarding men versus women?
The study found that older men were much more affected by financial support than women were.
And why would that be?
Well, if we link this back to Kenrick and evolutionary theory, males have historically focused very heavily on resource acquisition and status as part of their mating and parenting effort. It's their evolutionary job description, so to speak. So in old age, a lack of resources or needing financial help might hit a man's sense of self-worth much harder. It strikes at their core identity as a provider.
Whereas for women,
For women, the study suggests they were more responsive to emotional support. They valued the maintenance of family connections. They were less impacted by the financial specifics, provided that emotional bond was strong.
there was also a really interesting distinction between urban and rural older adults in China.
Yes, rural older adults had a much higher need for emotional support.
Why the difference there?
Context, again. In China, huge numbers of young people migrate to cities for work, leaving their parents behind in rural areas. They're often called left-behind seniors. Because their children are physically distant, they are. Well, they're starving for emotional connection. So
Right.
a phone call or a visit has a massive impact.
Meanwhile, in the cities where the families might be closer physically,
Urban seniors usually have stronger social networks and better health care. But the study found they were more sensitive to the guilt of daily care. Perhaps because they're in a more modernized environment where independence is so highly valued, the psychological cost of being a burden is higher.
and finally, there was one group for whom money did not seem to help at all.
The seniors with physical disabilities. For them, financial support did not reduce negative emotions.
Money couldn't fix the problem.
Exactly. If you are physically unable to care for yourself, money doesn't solve the core issue of disability. In those cases, emotional comfort becomes the only effective buffer. It reminds us that motivation is constrained by our physical reality. You can't buy your way out of biological decline.
So let's try to synthesize where we've traveled today. We started with Maslow's nice, neat, static ladder. We tore it down and replaced it with Kenrick's renovated pyramid, which is dynamic, overlapping, and centered on the biological imperative of parenting and evolutionary fitness.
And then we tested that biology against the reality of aging with the Wren study. We saw that while we're driven to support our lineage, to be the parent, the reverse process, being supported, is psychologically messy. It involves negotiating pride, guilt, and the need for social participation.
The key takeaway for me is that human motivation is not a level in a video game that you beat. You don't just finish safety and move on. It's a constant negotiation. We're negotiating with our biology, our life stage, and our immediate environment every single day.
I agree. And I think it challenges the way we look at our own lives. We often think, I just need to achieve X and then I'll be happy. But the evolutionary perspective says, no, you have a set of fundamental systems, safety, mate retention, status, and that they will always be running in the background. You never graduate from being a human animal.
Which leads us to a final thought for you. We spent a lot of time discussing the removal of self-actualization from the top of the pyramid. When we first said that, it felt like a loss, like we were losing something noble about being human and being reduced to just breeding.
But perhaps we're gaining something more profound.
How so?
Well, if the top of the pyramid is actually parenting and investing in kin, perhaps we need to redefine what self-actualization really is. Maybe the ultimate human goal isn't finding yourself in isolation on a mountaintop somewhere.
Maybe it's successfully supporting the people who come after you.
And, looking at the Wren study, maybe the final challenge of life is learning how to allow them to support you in return, without shame.
That might be the hardest lesson of all. A fascinating look at the architecture of our needs. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
We'll see you next time.